Another instalment of the HBPRCA ECR Zoom chat. Please note, as Dean said, this presentation will be recorded, and I'll ask you all to please mute yourselves, and if you have any questions, please post it into the chat. So today we're very fortunate to have Rachel, who will chat to us about building and maintaining successful international collaborations. So Rachel is an exercise national and international collaborations. So Rachel, please take it away.
Hey, thank you, Hamdi. I'll just share my screen now. Can you guys all see that? Yep, okay, great. So thanks, Hamdi, for that introduction, and thank you, Dean and the ECR committee for inviting me to present today and for initiating these Zoom chats. I think it's a really great way to keep in touch with everyone, so good work doing that. Yes, so I've been asked to speak on building and maintaining successful international collaborations, and I assume that that's based on my recent experience of doing an international postdoc in Paris, France, which I completed at the end of last year. So I'm going to give you a few tips about my experience, first on building collaborations and then on maintaining those collaborations. I think that international research collaborations are a really great way for us to expand our academic circles and provides us with insights into how other researchers and research groups around the world work. I do think that it is something that takes time and does often develop quite organically when you meet someone at a conference, for example. So I don't think it's something that you need to stress about and particularly worry about creating or developing at the moment. Particularly if you're in the early stages of your PhD, I think perhaps towards the end of your PhD or early postdoc years, it's something that you can think about. But when you're early on in the PhD, I think the focus needs to really be on the PhD. So, I'm sorry, it's on the other screen, so I'm going to be looking away from the camera a little bit. So in terms of building international collaborations, whether this is via doing an overseas postdoc or simply from Australia, reaching out to some collaborators overseas, I think that there are a few initial steps that we can all take. So firstly, I would suggest that you take initiative and be proactive at doing this. It is your collaboration that you're trying to establish. It's not your supervisors or someone else's. So you really need to do the work and reach out to those people rather than expecting the opportunities to come to you. Exactly. I think if you're thinking about building some international collaborations or you're wanting to reach out to some international researchers, I would suggest that you discuss your ideas with your supervisor or mentor or other people, because by doing this, I think it really opens up the possibilities and the opportunities that are out there, because your supervisor may be aware of some international postdoc opportunities that you're not aware of, or they may be able to provide guidance into how to reach out or who to reach out to. So it's really through having those initial conversations and opening up to those people about your interest in doing this, where this can really sort of get the ball rolling, I guess. And I'm more than happy to speak to people after this presentation or in future about my experience as well. So feel free to reach out to me as well. I think it's also really important to determine what you want to achieve out of this new collaboration. Do you want to access some data, some big data sets? Do you want to develop some new research skills or initiate a new project with a group? And is it going to be productive? Or do you currently have a lot on your plate and you don't actually have the capacity to make this collaboration a successful one? If you don't, I would suggest that focusing on what's on your plate at the moment, and then maybe further down the track, think about reaching out to those researchers. Because if you don't have the time available to put into this new collaboration, then it's not going to be a successful one. So if you're going to be building international collaborations by doing an overseas postdoc and moving to a new country, the first thing I would suggest is that you identify the research group and the collaborator that you want to work with. And this may actually evolve through conversations with your supervisors or mentors or alike. They may be able to identify a research group that may be suitable. I would then suggest that you have a clear idea about the research project that you want to do, at least some idea really before reaching out to that research group. You're not going to obviously have a fully formed idea because you don't know exactly what is available to you, and it's through talking with that new research group or collaborator that you'll be able to really develop the project. But I think you need to really think about what it is you want to achieve through this new collaboration. And if it is a postdoc, for example, what do you want to achieve through that postdoc as well? Like in Australia, most overseas research groups are pretty strapped for cash at the moment. So they would be very happy if you come with your own fellowships, your own funding. And when I started looking into this, I was quite surprised at how many fellowship schemes there were available to go overseas. So in my case, to go over to France, there was a lot of different organisations that I could apply to as an incoming researcher, which was really helpful. And I got access to those through the collaborator that I reached out to in France. He had sent me a whole list of names of different organisations that I could apply to. I also contacted the French embassy here in Australia to ask if they had any sort of scientific partnerships between France and Australia, which they did, and through that they had other sort of fellowships or small grants as well, which all helped. So I'd suggest if you are thinking about going to a different country to work, to reach out to the embassy too, because they may already have some existing collaborations between the two countries. The High Blood Pressure Research Council also has the Research Exchange Grant, and this is particularly for early career researchers to support you in developing your own international collaborations. So we're really fortunate to have this grant. There's 2 offered each year. And it's to support you to go to an overseas lab and work for a period of time and to start to establish those collaborations. So I'd really encourage people to apply for those grants as well, because it can be a really good first step. So once you get to the new research group and within the team, I would suggest that you also look for further collaborative opportunities. Bearing in mind that you may only be there for a short period of time. For example, if you're only there for 2 years, it can go very quickly, and you do have a project that you're meant to be working on, so you do need to focus on that project. But I would encourage you, while you're there, to reach out to neighbouring research groups, perhaps in the same country or in countries close by, and even there may be other postdocs or students who are starting at the same time as you are, or who are already existing in, within the research group, who you can form new collaborations with as well. So I think it's really a good opportunity to sort of think about what else you can add on to this experience while you're there in this new research group. Finally, I think it's really important that you are prepared and organised for such an experience, because it takes a lot to organise the research and to have your project and your fellowship or whatever all organised. But if you're moving to another country, there's a lot of other things that need to be considered as well, such as finding a new place to live, visas, a bank account, for example, and in my case, doing it in a foreign language, it was quite difficult. So you need to be prepared for that and quite organised, because it can be quite disruptive to your productivity as well. So yeah, forward planning is definitely required. So that's all if you're going overseas to do an overseas postdoc. I guess I think, though, we don't necessarily need to go overseas to build these collaborations. I think we can established some great international collaborations by being here in Australia, and particularly now in the time of COVID, where a lot of people are quite used to video conferencing. I think it's a good opportunity now to leverage off that and to develop some collaborations from here. So the same as if you were going overseas, I would suggest that you firstly identify the research group and collaborators, and have an idea of the project that you want to do with your new collaborators. I would then suggest that you set up a time to discuss the proposed collaboration and project, and then meet regularly to progress the project. I think this comes back to my earlier point about what you actually want to get out of the collaboration and whether you actually have time to commit to it. If you don't have the time to meet regularly and progress the project, then it's never going to be a successful collaboration. So yeah, I really encourage you to make sure you do have that time. And then I would also suggest that you do try to meet in person, either at a conference or if you're going to a conference, maybe visiting their lab afterwards, and just to discuss and brainstorm about the project and ensure that this collaboration is a successful one. So in terms of maintaining the international collaborations, whether it be by going to another country and doing an overseas postdoc or from here in Australia, I think it's really important to have a long-term plan. So, you know, if you want this to be an ongoing collaboration, which most of us do, then it's all well and good to have your short-term project, your initial project, or your 2-year postdoc, for example. But if you don't have follow-up projects after that, then the collaboration's never going to continue. So it's really important to sort of be thinking long-term about what you want to achieve through this collaboration. So some ways of doing that may be co-supervising students. So for example, you may have a PhD student here in Australia who is wanting some overseas experience, and they may want to go overseas for a couple of months and work with your collaborator overseas, for example. Or they may have a PhD student finishing over there who wants to come and do an international postdoc in Australia, which is another way to keep the collaborations going. Co-organising workshops or writing funding proposals are other ways that you can maintain that collaboration. Try to maintain regular contact. So if you do have long-term projects that you're working on, try to meet regularly so that you can discuss and progress the projects. And I would suggest also trying to meet in person once a year. So again, whether that be at a conference or visiting their lab, or them coming over here to Australia, for example. I think it's good to allow a period of time, half a day, for example, to discuss the projects and future work and brainstorm. I think it can be quite productive to maintain those collaborations. Finally, I think probably one of the most important points to highlight really, and I think this goes for much of what we do in research, which is very collaborative and team-based. I think it's really important to be someone who others actually want to collaborate with. It's all well and good to reach out and form these collaborations, but if your collaborators are not getting anything out of the collaboration, or they're not benefiting, or they're finding it difficult to work with you, or the project's slow to progress, for example, then they're not going to be willing to continue that collaboration and wanting to put in effort to maintain that. So I think being proactive and dependable, hardworking and reliable, as you know, most of us are in research anyway, are really important things to keep in mind with these collaborations. And finally, I think on a personal level, I think it's really important to be bold and put yourself out there. I know it can be quite daunting reaching out to these new groups and putting yourself into the groups, but I think the collaboration can't really exist unless you really, put yourself out there. So you may have to dress up as part of the lab retreat, as I had to do, and to perform a dance actually in front of the whole institute. That was something. Have fun. I think doing an overseas postdoc, or at least having some overseas experience in another research lab, can be a really great time to get to know these people, and it can be a really fun time as well. And I think getting to know them, your new collaborators, on a personal level is a really good way to develop strong friendships and collaborations and make sure that they do last for a long time. So yeah, that's all that I had, and I'm happy to discuss anything with you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a very eye-opening presentation. I guess I will wait for people to ask questions via the chat, or if you would like, you can speak up. Just sort of following on from a comment in the chat about timing, I was wondering what you mentioned that like early on in your career, you probably should focus on doing your PhD and establishing yourself. But what other time, do you have any suggestions on times that people should be looking for collaborations?
I think it's all relative, really. It depends, as I was saying, I think it depends on what you want to achieve from the collaboration. If you are doing quite well, if you've got a lot of projects on at the moment in Australia and you can't handle anything more, then there's no point reaching out to someone. But I think, probably early on in the postdoc, or sort of, a few years into your postdoc, I think it's probably a good idea to start building some independence and reaching out and showing that your research is not your supervisor's research, and by building your own collaborations away from your supervisor or your supervisor's collaborators is a good way to do that.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
Thanks, Rach. Looking back now on your sort of initial experience going overseas in that first, that postdoc you did, what are the things that you think worked really well, and what would you perhaps do slightly differently this time, if you did it again, I guess?
I think I'll start with what I would do differently is definitely being more prepared. I think going to France was one thing. The French bureaucracy is quite challenging, and I actually, to get my French visa, flew over to France, had to fly back to Australia for 4 days, and it was a mess. So I think having that all organised a bit more in advance would have been great, because it was quite disruptive, and it did mean I had maybe 2 months out from being productive with my research. So I'd really advise that you plan and are really well organised for that, because it can be very disruptive. What I think worked really well, I think my supervisor was very open to me forming new collaborations outside of his research group. So I had that discussion with him early on about sort of making the most of being there in France, and he put me in contact with people from the Netherlands and from the UK as well. So, and actually I'm still working with them on various analyses now. Also, I was fortunate that 2 other postdocs started at the same time as me, and I saw it as a really great opportunity to work on some projects with them. So we didn't really have anything, we weren't working on a clinical study, for example, collecting any data or anything like that, but we decided to write a review paper together, and that was the start of like a good collaboration with them as well. So I think, really looking for those opportunities and making the most of them while you're there is really valuable.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I can ask another one. So I guess I was wondering more about starting that initial communication with a collaborator. What sort of things should you say to them? What sort of things should you present to them Like, do you go to them with an actual idea about what you want to do in their lab, or?
So I would suggest probably starting by having the conversation with your supervisor first, or a mentor, and probably your supervisor would maybe even send an email on your behalf and CC you in, and then you can continue with the conversation, or your supervisor may be happy for you to reach out on your own. I would suggest that you sort of tell your new identified collaborator a little bit about yourself and why you're reaching out to them. Maybe send them your CV as well so they can see what sort of work you have been doing. Bearing in mind that everyone's busy and no one's going to read a whole page of an email, so kind of getting to the point straight away I think is good, and waiting to hear their response and maybe reaching out if you don't hear from them again.
I guess I have one other last sort of question. So you mentioned early on, and I guess some of it you might have answered in Dean's question, but you mentioned early on being prepared for going overseas. Can you specifically expand on like how going overseas has impacted your career so far?
Yeah. So negatively or positively?
Both, please.
So I guess positively, it, like I mentioned to Dean, it allowed for me to reach out to other research groups, and I've now got these other research collaborations beyond just with the French group, and some good data sets that I have access to. And was able to work with these other 2 new postdocs to write this review paper, everything. And also just being there and putting your name out there, people invite you to be involved in other things as well. So I was able to be involved in some grant applications as well, which has led to further collaborations and so on. But yeah, I think you really do need to put yourself out there and, say, hello, I'm here, I want to work on this project and I'm really enthusiastic and so on. I said, being bold and sort of planning yourself there within the group really helps to be noticed and to be invited to be part of those other projects as well. Negatively, I think like I said, it is very disruptive moving over to France, well, to another country, and then also moving back again. So, being organised and having things in place and before going over there, I think is really important. And it will probably mean that there are a couple of months where you're not in the headspace to be writing papers, but maybe you can have something else like data analysis or something like that still ticking over. But it may cause a drop in your publication output, but you may be able to still be doing some other things. So being prepared for that and not being too hard on yourself that you aren't publishing those papers or getting those things out as quickly as you would like to during that time, and maybe putting some other things in place that can be done during that time when you're living out of some random place and don't have an internet, don't have a phone. Yeah.
So we've got a question from Martin, and he wants to know how you navigate the often busy international collaborators and PIs in terms of getting time with them, discussing your proposals and your research and where you're sort of going. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I guess for me now with my French collaborators, we still meet every second week. So sometimes we meet for 5 minutes and say we've got nothing to update each other on. Other times we will talk for an hour and a half about various projects or, just simply brainstorm things. So I think that's really important to maintain the collaboration, as I was saying, and to have the next project in mind. So when we do finish one project, we're kind of moving on to the next one. And also, I think when I go over to Europe for conferences, I try to tack on a day here and there, or if it's with my direct collaborators in France, I'll go and stay for an extra week with them. They know that I'm coming, so they'll dedicate some time to actually work on our projects together. And yeah, so I think that's been really beneficial. And also, yeah, conferences, trying to pin them down and say, you know, do you have a lunchtime that we can chat about this project, or can we meet for half a day before the conference and brainstorm a little bit, I think has been really useful. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but yeah.
Any other questions? I've got one last one. So you mentioned to perhaps like get on to like co-supervising students and stuff like that. But if you're in a foreign country and it's a language that you're not very familiar with, or you probably don't know, do you have any tips on how you could go about supervising students in that sort of way?
Yes, so I think we're quite fortunate that research is, the international language of research is English, so most people speak English anyway. So I co-supervised a master's student over there while I was there, which was great. She spoke English, and I did try to speak French from time to time with her. But I think it's possible in English. Yeah, it's no problem. Yeah, I think if you're going to be supervising some students here too in Australia, I think if you've got your established international collaborations and they're willing to have a student come over for a couple of months, I think it can be a really great thing, beneficial to your PhD students as well, to open their eyes up and give them some experience overseas as well, if that's, yeah, what they want to do. Yeah.
All right, if there's no last minute nagging sort of questions, I would like you guys to all join me in thanking Rachel for a very wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'll also like to remind you guys that next Tuesday from 12:30 to 1, we have Anastasia who will be talking to us about building social media engagement. So it'd be great to see you guys all there. But with that, I'd wrap up the Zoom session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Hamdi. Thank you, everyone. Bye.